hoping to get kind of a check-in on where we're at in the voting, urge people to vote, and go from there. But other than that, we're going to have the normal validator updates. We'll talk about Accelerate in May, which all validators should attend. So if you're a validator operator, please consider going to NYC at the latter half of May. We'll talk about educational workshops coming up. And then I think the majority of the time will be filled up with SIMD227, the draft SIMD from Ashwin and Max from the ONZA team, talking about eliminating vote fees. So a lot to discuss. Let's get into it. First of all, updates. Agave 2.1.14 is recommended for mainnet, and FireDancer v305.20111 is recommended for mainnet as well. You may have seen some operators that are running 4.0 in mainnet already on FireDancer. They are still working through audits on the v4 or v0.4 version of FireDancer, but some have chosen to go at it anyway on mainnet. But that will be generally recommended for mainnet probably sometime within the next 2 or 3 weeks, just depending on audits and any fixes that come from that. So keep a lookout for that. The v4 version includes the set identity support, so you can switch between an Agave node and a FireDancer node, or 2 FireDancer nodes, or whichever you want to do. And then it also includes support for bundles, which include geo bundles. So some cool features coming in FireDancer v0.4. Feature gates. So a couple interesting feature gate activations that are coming. SIMD123 epoch stakes is second in the testnet queue, and then it has to get through the mainnet queue as well. So, oops, judging by the current queue, here's the pending mainnet queue. There's about 5 mainnet activations ahead, and then a few on testnet. So given we're activating about 2 a week, that'll probably be 2 to 3 months or so before this one gets on mainnet. But this is a pretty useful one for governance tooling. And since we're talking a lot about governance tooling right now, it's probably worth bringing up. Get epoch stakes allows an on-chain program to figure out stake weights for validators for an epoch. So pretty useful for tooling there. Another one coming up is the popular SIMD 207, raising block limits to 50 million CUs. Currently, they're at 48. So this is more of a sort of like incremental test to see if going from 48 to 50 cluster-wide breaks anything or causes any sort of read layer issues. But there's also already another SIMD in the works to bump it to 60 million CUs. So the Agave team, as well as the FireDancer team, is pushing really hard to get more capacity into blocks so we can, have more on-chain activity. So really exciting to see there. Any questions about those pending feature activations? No? All right, moving along. Some of you may have seen in Discord that there was a feature activation recently to skip rewriting rent-exempt accounts during rent collection. So this is essentially, this is essentially on the way to disabling rent, which for those who've been around for a while, has been kind of a complicated thing that we do every epoch that we no longer need to do because accounts just have a minimum amount of rent, the rent exempt minimum now, instead of having a amount collected every epoch. As part of this activation, there's some high IO that operators are seeing. That is, we think, expected. It should last for an epoch or two. So operators are suggested to monitor their IO, and hopefully it will come down in the next epoch. There is an issue here that I'll link in the comments that explains it from Brooks. But generally speaking, if you're seeing high IO, it should go away soon. And if not, we'll investigate more. Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Related to that, we've actually seen a huge improvement in geyser performance. because there were a whole bunch of those updates that were also getting pushed through the Geyser interface and consuming just a ton of bandwidth. So for ingesters, things like DOS API, anybody who's doing any indexing, the total traffic going through the interface was down like 6 to 10 times. It was amazing. So absolutely amazing work. I hope that these other IO issues you're talking about are just temporary, like you said. But it was definitely a big win in other areas.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really exciting to hear. All right. Yeah, so link there. Please monitor. Hopefully will go away in an epoch or two. For testnet, thank you to all the testnet operators. We got over 80% of stake on FireDancer v0.4. As I mentioned, this has some highly anticipated features in it. So really, really helpful to test those out on testnet with Jito support enabled. Going forward, I think testing is kind of sufficient there. We're going to aim for a 50-50 stake split on testnet, 50% FireDancer, 50% Agave. We're not quite there, but if you do have a node that is currently running FireDancer, has a lot of stake, and you'd like to switch it over to Agave, please do. We're aiming for that 50-50 split. Recommended versions right now on testnet are FireDancer v0.406 and Agave 221. 222 is very likely to come out soon, so watch out for that. Any questions on testnet? All right. SIMDs. So SIMD123 and SIMD228. My things I just want to mention here, there's about 6 hours left in voting. So if you have not voted yet, please go do so. The vote closes at the end of epoch 755. The vote right now is pretty damn close. And, you know, my biggest takeaway here is that if the topic is interesting enough, people do care. We have, we'll go look at this dashboard over here. We have over 68% participating, 68.9% of stake participating in this vote. So over a supermajority, which I think is a pretty conclusive decision. Okay, great. Pretty cool to see that much stake participating, even if, you know, it may not be the vote that you wanted. It's still, yeah, pretty encouraging to see this many people caring. Yeah, and just to kind of point out here, a lot of highly staked as well as low stake validators participating. For SIMD123, somewhat of a different story. People are participating, but not as high of a rate for some reason. I don't really know why people are voting on one but not the other. This one, not to speculate, but has a higher margin right now. So if we go back here, with 6 hours left, SIMD123 has 75% of the yeses. So looking more likely, but you know, there's still time. Yeah, any other comments on that? Just sort of the process before we move on.
And it may be that if you're likely to see that a SIMD is going to pass, you might get more lazy about actually voting for it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that both of these have been pretty tight for a while, so maybe that's part of the reason for more participation. But yeah, either way, cool to see. Yeah, as part of this, just to kind of build off this, there'll be a lot of discussion about the process, about the tooling, about what's good and not good, about the whole governance process. So, you know, please make your voices heard in that as well. I think there are definitely some things that can be cleaned up and made kind of easier for voters and for stakers. So yeah, please keep pushing this forward. All right, switching gears a bit, we are going to have an Accelerate conference in NYC in May. Accelerate is Solana's technical focus conference. There'll be sort of two different tracks. So Accelerate has the ship or die track and the scale or die track, the two separate days, or sorry, two separate sets of days. I don't know why it's backwards, but May 19th and 20th is Scale or Die. This is the more technical focused conference. This is the one that I encourage all validator operators to attend. I've been getting some pings from operators saying that they weren't accepted. Hopefully that's cleaned up now. So if you've applied already and you weren't accepted for whatever reason as an operator, let me know, send me your email, contact info. I should be able to get you accepted. But going forward, there should be a validator role that includes you all. So again, if you haven't signed up, please do. Would love to see you all there. And then Ship or Die is happening from May 22nd to 23rd, the latter half of the week. And this one is more focused on products. It will still have technical aspects to it, but it is more kind of like a, product announcements, product vision, that sort of thing. Less so like the nitty gritty of technical details. Yep. What else did I want to see there? Oh yeah, one other thing there is there's potentially going to be a validator meetup in New York. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that yet. Maybe I think Max or maybe the.
I've heard the same rumor. I believe it's true. Yeah. If two of us have heard it,
okay,
it could be true.
So yeah,
I heard it on the internet though. Yeah,
yeah. Make that three, so maybe that gives it more credence.
Yeah. Well, really would love to see that. We had kind of an informal meetup before in Lisbon a couple years ago, and it's a lot of fun just to meet people and see them in person. So hope to see a lot of you there.
Yeah, I'll just say a few things about that. Try and put something together. Still very early stages, so we don't know exactly what it will look like. But if you're interested in helping organize or sponsoring, let me know.
Yep, awesome. Yeah, Andy.
Is there any sort of like event calendar or agenda or a little more detail on what Scale or Die entails, and like I guess the reasoning why you think validators should go?
Yeah, so there's no set agenda yet. I think they're still trying to work through what the talks will be. Types of things you can expect are potentially discussions on things like, that we're talking about right now, which is eliminating vote fees, might be a good topic for one of the stages there. I know there's kind of like bigger protocol changes in the works being discussed that might be discussed there as well. So I think if you're an operator interested in kind of where the protocol is going, yeah, sorry, I get the names mixed up, to be honest.
I'll get some context.
Yeah, go ahead, Saul.
I'll get context as I'm the one doing all the programming. It's a combination of research, security and privacy, core dev, infrastructure, developer tooling. Today, the programming is a little more tinged towards core dev, so we're trying to round it out with some more applications, ZK research stuff. But today, there's a lot of conversations around like lattice hash changes, MCP, 228, and some other pieces. So it's going to be more like a core developer conference than it is a generalist developer conference, but will be pretty open. So it'll be good to have validators there, just because there will be a lot of core dev focused type talks and panels.
Yeah, and that's Scale or Die 19th through 20th, the first half of the week. Cool. All right, back here. So just a quick plug here. I missed I did not schedule the educational workshop last week. Somebody reminded me on Discord, so thanks for that. Planning to do it next week. Topics that we discussed are still performance, so I think we'll probably continue with that one unless someone has a more burning topic they'd like to discuss. All right, so look out for announcements for that. I'll probably talk to Chris and others about sort of shaping out this performance talk, but I think that'll be the general goal of the talk. All right, with all of that, I think I will hand it off to Max and maybe Ashwin if he's here. Oh, yeah, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
A quick question before we dive into the 257. Is there any updates on IVC or when that's going to be pushed through, the intermediate vote credits?
Is Ashwin on the call? I know he's working on it. I just don't know what the status is.
Yeah, I'm looking for approvals from everyone on Anza's and Jump side before pushing that through or merging it.
Cool,
Yeah.
thanks.
Ashwin doesn't seem to be on the call, but I know he's been working on the code, so I think it's in the works. I just don't know when it will land.
Yeah, Ashwin is like super busy on a few things right now, so he's definitely still interested in it. It's also partly like the fork rate is so low that the impact of the mod that this was designed to combat has gone down as the fork rate has gone down. So it's like been slightly deprioritized, but still something that we're looking at.
Great. All right. So yeah, switching gears, SIMD257. This is the SIMD to eliminate vote fees. Want to emphasize this is still in draft form, so still being discussed. But there's a lot of details in this proposal. It's sort of an overarching proposal that might be broken up, and Max is here to talk about, I think, the general thought behind the change and answer questions. So go ahead, Max.
Yeah, if you go to the Ashwin's fork, you can see the rendered markdown.
I think it's
Like, oh,
should show it.
oh, there we go. Yeah, so the basic idea of this is like, if we want to change vote fees at all, they're kind of holding up a bunch of other parts of the protocol, and in particular, they're stopping vote spam and stopping excessive validator counts right now. And so that's why there's like so many changes in this proposal, because if you want to do number one, which is remove vote base fees, then you also have to figure out how to stop that spam. And another thing that vote fees are doing is that they're incentivizing inclusion of votes. So we have to incentivize inclusion of votes some other way. So that's why there's 6 things. I'll just go over them. Like the first thing is that removing base fees for voting. That's the goal of the proposal. The second one is to divert 25% of the issuance that's currently going towards vote credits to vote inclusion credits. And that's because we're now removing vote base fees. We want to have some incentive to include votes still here. And it turns out that this 25% number isn't just pulled out of a hat. We can talk about how it's derived later, but it's basically there so that even if you're censoring the vote of a super large validator, the incremental improvement in your own revenue from them not getting their vote credits is still not enough to outweigh what you would get as a vote inclusion credit. So it's kind of there to make sure that the validator should include the vote, no matter how big the stake of the voter is. The other things on here are validators should earn votes based on their absolute performance rather than their relative performance. So that's part of the similar thing for 2, which is reducing the incentive to censor votes. There's currently a mod that I won't go into too much detail about, but you can make some money by censoring other validators' votes if you want to. And since you have 4 blocks in a row, you can even do it and still earn the base fee. So we're trying to stop that from happening with this proposal. And then the last few things are probably going to be separated into a separate SIMD, although they're part of the same thing here, which is vote transactions should no longer count towards the global CU limit. Well, we need, no, we don't need 5 just because of 4, Sam. We need 5 anyway, because even if votes had their own limit, then if we could have like infinite number of validators, that would also be a DOS vector with, you know, infinite votes coming in. So we need both of them. They're relatively independent. I mean, okay. And the last thing is there's some slight modifications that need to be made now that we're introducing this vote inclusion credit. You might want to delay your vote till you're the leader. And so number 6 is kind of a patch for that. Okay, questions are coming in, but maybe we should stop there and let people do their questions by voice if they want to. Okay.
Yeah, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious if you ran the economic numbers on this as well, because for eliminating the vote fee, then that means we're eliminating the burn as well. Kind of curious what that looks like.
Yeah, it's not a large portion of the current, like it's not that large relative to inflation. Maybe I should put I did put some tables in here of what we ran, because the validators earn reward based on their absolute performance does slightly impact. Maybe you can go to that, Tim. There's a table in here that shows the impact of 3 on validator revenue.
And Max, is that, let's say that 228 passes and inflation is much less, will that be a larger portion of?
Yeah, it's pretty minor. I'll put it in the proposal. That's a good point, but it will be pretty minor even after 228. The amount of inflation here from votes, and it's like we end up needing to do enough inflation to incentivize the vote anyway, so it's not really like free burn that we get.
Well, thank you.
Is the rewards table not working?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be linkable here.
It's on the other branch, maybe. Sorry, it's on Ashwin's branch. If you could just go to proposals and go to 257, or you can look at that. Right. Yeah. So you can see that the impact on revenue from the making vote credits absolute is very slight, like less than 1% around. These are for top 10 validators by stake, but it should be pretty similar for everybody, because if you're performing well, then you're basically getting all the credits anyway.
Yeah, you went to, sorry, Max, you can update that if 228 passes as well?
Yeah, it's the same relative percentage. It's about whether it's the percentage of vote credits that you earn, not the so it's the same relative percentage.
Okay, makes sense.
Zantetsu, go ahead.
Yeah, just to further the point I made in text, is it really necessary to limit or reduce or eliminate the CUs of votes as part of this proposal? It feels like it's not related to actually eliminating vote fees.
Well, the goal of the proposal is I'm basically trying to clean up a bunch of economic debt that has accrued over time. In, like, I mean, obviously we had people vote lagging, now we have timely vote credits. What I'm trying to do, and it's down in the proposal in terms of like what the desiderata for everything and why everything's in here, is I'm trying to make it so that there's no question that you should send your vote in a timely manner, and that you should include votes when you receive them in the same slot that you receive them in. And in order to do that, separating vote CUs from other CUs is necessary, because there's sometimes when you get a vote from, like, say a validator that has min SFDP stakes, so 20K SOL staked, and their vote is a transaction, and if the chain is congested, the marginal price of the priority fee on the marginal transaction you could include if you remove that vote is enough that you should remove that vote and include a transaction that got sent to you that isn't a vote. And so that's why 4 is in there. I think you could do this without 4. It's just that if you want to prove that the system is such that when you receive a vote, you include it in your block, and when you have the vote to broadcast, you broadcast it right away, then we do need 4 for that.
So can I point out that it's every validator's advantage to include enough votes to at least confirm the fork they're on. otherwise there's a chance they could get forked and lose all the block rewards that they might have otherwise achieved on that particular fork. So there's already an incentive to at least confirm your own fork with votes in your blocks. I don't know how you express that in terms that makes it relatable to the other, benefits that you're getting from not including votes, but it's just something to think about. But I'm only pointing this out because I think we should all be aware, and I'm sure you're probably aware, that 5 is going to be a big point of contention and a big point of arguing. And if 5 is really only there because of 4, then finding alternative ways to do that doesn't then require a limiting of validator set. Even if the limiting of validator set is the best technical solution, I still feel like it's going to potentially result in pushback that could, submarine what is otherwise a very good proposal. So that's the feedback.
Yeah, I see your point. I guess to clarify, 5 is not there because of 4. 5 is there because we removed vote fees, so now it's free to vote. So you can make infinite validators with one sole stake. So one of the alternatives that we considered is, what if we had a min sole stake? And the problem there is, in order to get the same guarantee that we have here, where we only have 2,000 active validators. Yeah, 2,000 is also more than the number of validators we have now by a lot. But in order to get the same guarantee with a min stake, that min stake has to be relatively high. And if the goal is, remove the barriers of entry for smaller validators and make smaller validators have an easier time, then it would be counterproductive to then introduce the min stake necessary to secure the network here. So you have to have some way of limiting the number of validators, because infinite validators is going to crush the network. But if we do it the other way, which is min stake or bonds, either way, you need some minimum amount of SOL to guarantee that infinite validators don't get spun up. One SOL would not be enough, because then you just take 1 million SOL and you just spin it up, and the cost to bring down the network is only 1 million SOL, which is not good.
Is the limit of 2,000, was that calculated based upon some aspect of the actual cost of processing votes and transmitting votes, or was that just kind of picked? Because maybe a higher number like 5,000 could just assuage anybody's concern. If 5,000 is also, because I know votes they take a little bit to process, a little bit of CPU, and maybe the voting program could be made a little bit more efficient. That could then give us back some resources that can be used to dedicate more processing to votes. And I don't know what the network transmission is involved in processing votes, but I'm just suggesting I want to see this pass, and I just don't want 2,000 to be the point of contention. So if it can be raised somehow, it would be good.
Yeah, I guess I chose 2,000. I didn't do a thorough accounting of what the actual marginal cost per validator is on the network, partly because those things are changing in real time. If you want to do all-to-all for votes, then each additional validator is very expensive, because the communication overhead is number of validators squared. So, the marginal on that is like 2,000 extra messages for each additional validator at the 2,000 level, and it's 5,000 extra messages for each additional validator at the 5,000 level. And that's something we're actively looking at right now as a way to speed up votes and speed up consensus, is all-to-all.
But
so,
I vote to the leader, not to every other validator. I don't send my votes to every validator. I sent them to the leader, or
this is
a small subset of upcoming leaders.
This is correct, but we're actively looking right now at moving to all-to-all for vote transmission and not doing it through Turbine, and so that's why we would like it to be on the lower side. But it's also, I think 2,000 is kind of a round number that is above the current number of validators that we have, so it wouldn't kick anybody off the active validator set when we initiate it. But it's not 5K, and I think it could be changed in the future if we have a bunch of optimizations.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Max, so all-to-all suggests a different consensus algorithm here, right?
Yeah.
Any other comments or ideas on that? It's interesting.
I think we had some, for those of you who were at Core Devs, we shared some initial stuff on this. It's something that we wanted to announce at Accelerate. So there will be a lot more details at Accelerate on what that looks like.
Come to Accelerate.
Nice. Okay, I see what you did there. Nice.
Yeah, I'd want to kind of echo concerns around the 2000 number. I think I could see a world very quickly where people just fill up that number right away as soon as this gets activated. So that essentially creates a dynamic min stake, right? My question would be, is there any thought about alternative ways to get in that 2000 set other than just having more stake than the min? Because otherwise you're essentially paying to become a validator. Like you have to have wherever that min is in order to join that set.
If anybody has any ideas, I'm very open to hearing them. The only two things I could think of was like min stake or bond, which are basically the same thing, and then this. So if somebody has a better idea, I'm all ears for it. I just don't know if there's any other way to do it. I mean, the current way is we're also making them pay through these vote fees.
Yeah. Andrew, good.
I was just going to echo what you said, Tim. I think 2000 sounds really low, and it probably would get filled immediately. I think there's probably an argument to be made that all the debate around SIMD8 and lowering inflation, like net of all of it, is there a certain level of inflation that's worth considering if you don't add this cap and you don't remove vote fees? Like there could be an argument made for like a minimum delegation fee and a minimum, like basically make it sustainable for smaller validators while maintaining vote fees.
So Yuri suggests why not 2K seats and then we choose based on the stake. So there's another part of this proposal, which is we actually have a limit on how many people we can cycle in and out of the active validator set in each epoch, which is 18%. And the reason we have that is because we have fast confirmations. And if we cycle too many validators over 18% in and out of the set in the same, like in one epoch, we can actually have a situation where that fast confirmation is broken, which we definitely don't want to do. And if you're like randomly choosing, there's some chance that you just like randomly don't choose Helios or something. And maybe you like, there's a bunch of weird edge cases there where you just like randomly try to cycle out way too many people from the active validator set each epoch. And so this would be a way to make it so that, you know, the people who are getting cycled in and out are people with very small stake because they're the bottom, however many in terms of stake. So if we did what Yuri suggested, it would be a lot more complexity to try and make sure we don't have the validator set consistency that we need to keep the fast confirmations from being a problem.
Go ahead, Zen.
So I'm sorry if this is already clear from this proposal and I'm just missing it, but you know, the fact that votes cost sol to cast means that it costs money to create a Sybil, because if you had $1 million stake in one validator, and a private validator that you could at any time own, you know, owning and controlling your own stake, split however you want, you split into two validators, you're paying twice the vote cost. In this proposal, what is the additional cost of splitting a validator into two? Is there an extra cost to that, or is there no extra cost to doing that?
Other than the fact that you have to send double the messages, there wouldn't be an extra cost.
So that concerns me because with the 2000 limit, it should be pretty easy for a validator to split into any arbitrary number of individual vote accounts, run them off of one machine that sends out all the votes. You know, I mean, I think you can have vote accounts gossiping that they all have the same IP address, and you probably don't need to end up paying, you know, all of the extra bandwidth that you would need to pay if they were on individual separate machines. I don't know exactly, but I'm just worried that it could be possible for someone to fill up that 2000 very easily with some private stake and potentially block out new validators from coming into the, you know, into the network.
Well, I guess I would say that it's a good point. I think it's not great to have the other way around, which is right now we're dealing with an incentive to get together with some other validator and combine your stake and half your vote fees, which I think is worse than the incentive being, I mean, we already have some other things that are like, you want to have higher stake. Like if you want to be on the first layer of the turbine tree, you probably want to be in the top 200, right? And that's a dynamic cutoff there that already exists. And people are actively, you can see how the stake looks. They are very clearly trying to be in the top layer of the turbine tree. And you can see it in the stake dynamics, but that's a cutoff right there. And so I think for a really large validator, you want to be in the top 200. And so the splitting your stake into another 100 pieces to try and freeze out a few very small stake validators is probably not worth it.
I think the stronger incentive is actually going to be coming with slashing. And to Zan's point, like there will be a really strong incentive to split stake under the current proposed rules of slashing. Because like the best risk adjusted returns will be like one that's distributed geographically across operators, et cetera.
So then that would use up more of that 2,000 because the 2,000
Yeah, exactly. The 2,000 is going to fill up immediately. That's like not even a question in my mind.
So
Okay,
then
but
yeah,
spreading like your validators across geographic places to reduce your risk of slashing is very good for the network, right? Like we all agree that that's something that we'd like to see.
It's not about good or bad. I'm just saying the 2,000 will fill up quickly, and there's a strong incentive, especially with a dynamically lowering threshold, at which point like slashing is not applied, to distribute stake. And as I understand it, there'll probably be other parts of the protocol changed at the same time. So it's like everything's a moving target right now. It's kind of confusing.
I guess I would say just keep in mind that if you want to do some kind of proposal like this, you either need min stake / bond, which is also min stake, by the way, they're the same, or you need this. And so the question is, what is the min stake going to end up in equilibrium being required from this versus min stake? I think that it will be less in this because I think there are a bunch of incentives to keep your stake together, at least to be in the top layer of the turbine tree. Whereas if it was min stake and we have to do the math on what the min stake has to be to keep the network secure, it's going to be way higher than we want it to be and way higher than the actual threshold will be on these 2,000.
Can I jump in? Try and get a word in here. So I think the 2000 really concerns me because if there's anything that we should be learning is that static limits don't work. It seems to be a recurring theme that we keep trying to fix at the moment, things that originally was kind of fixed or hard-coded limits that are not great. And I think it's very limiting kind of in the future to have that kind of fixed limit. But I don't have necessarily the best solution, but one thing I'm thinking about is whether the vote inclusion credit can be linked to the stake weight of the vote that you're including, but the vote fee is not. So the vote fee is flat. So if you have more stake, you have a higher chance of your vote being included. So there's a disincentive from splitting, but you still have the same fee. So if you have less stake, you can't spam votes because your fee is less. So there's still that disincentive to spam. That probably is a reason that wouldn't work. But I think thinking about some way of making it dynamic is probably desirable because otherwise we're just going to have a SIMD in a year to change it to something dynamic.
Tim,
and I agree
go?
that concern about the 2000 being filled up and somehow being attacked by civils is definitely a concern.
Tim, can you go down to there's a desiderata section where I put in what I was actually trying to solve for here. And there's a thing in here which maybe you guys don't agree with, which is that the rewards for validators should be as close to linear in stake as possible. That's like something that I put in here as something that I thought was going to be an uncontroversial desiderata. I'm not sure if it is uncontroversial or we're basically trying to do something that's impossible here. But for me, which is rewards should be linear in stake, is like we don't want validator set concentration because people have larger stake validators have higher rewards, which on net they do today, because you get rid of the vote costs are like this constant thing. So if you're very small, you have a huge vote cost, and if you're very large, your vote cost per stake is not as high. So for me, that's like something that is uncontroversial, and we should, like, if that's something that you want, then some of the things you guys are suggesting are not in that direction. If that's not something we want, let me know so I can change it and try to find something that fits a different set of desiderata that are in this proposal.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
When you say linear, you mean proportional to the stake, or are you saying that? Yeah, I guess I'm not following your definition of linear.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sorry, I should have said proportional, but just, if you double your stake, you should get double the rewards.
Right.
As close to that as possible. Obviously, we're gonna have server costs.
Right. So if you double your stake, you double your rewards. So in this case, the fixed costs would stay the same, right? The vote costs would essentially go away. So the fixed costs are essentially server costs, and then whatever operational costs people attribute to their operation in terms of like the people running the machines. Yeah, I mean, it is the way proof of stake works, which is usually the argument I get anytime I say we don't want this. I don't necessarily have a good solution to get away from it, but it also does impact the compounding issue. Essentially, once a validator gets a head start, it's really hard for a new entrant to catch up unless they have a bunch of capital to put into their own stake. Can you say why you assumed everybody would want this?
Oh, I just thought, like, well, if you have something which is super linear in stake, then it's exactly what you said, which is that large validators end up accumulating stake over time. And if you have something which is sublinear in stake, you have the problem that Zan mentioned, which is that people want to split their validators up. And so I would assume that neither of those are desirable, and the only remaining opportunity then is to be linear in stake.
Right. And I think it's on a pretty interesting fundamental core problem, and I'm glad you're at least bringing it up here. But I think it'll be something that I think about a little bit more if there's an opportunity to maybe do something different. Although, again, off the top of my head, I can't think of it, but I'm glad you at least highlight that. And I'll think through it a little bit more and see if I can come up with anything useful.
Go, Michael.
Yeah, I just want to, the linear to stake thing. I think it's broadly desirable, but we shouldn't take it as gospel in that it has to be like perfectly linear from the floor all the way to the top. Vote fees, the disincentive to spam, I think, is important. We could see a way to maybe reduce vote fees, but I think having kind of some base level vote fees is important to disincentivize spam. And on the other hand, I'm kind of been coming around to the idea, and just throwing this out as something to maybe think about, is capping the stake at which you earn rewards. And if you have more than 1 or 2% of the network in stake, you don't earn incremental rewards. And yes, that will lead to validators wanting to split their validators, but it's probably still better for 3% of stake to be split across 3 validators with 1 operator than on a single node. So I think that could be something to also think about, probably out of the scope of this proposal, but just on the idea of linear rewards. But between those 2 points, it should be linear.
I would agree with Zan that they don't actually end up running on the same node. Actually, we can see this from ETH. There's, something like 700,000 validators, and how many full nodes are there? Less than 10,000. So obviously many of those are running on the same box, and it doesn't actually really contribute much to decentralization. On the other hand, they have a huge issue where, I'm not saying we would go all the way in this direction, I'm not saying you're suggesting that, but they have this huge issue which is affecting their block times, which is they have 700,000 signatures to aggregate. And we don't want more signatures, we don't want more messages than we need. Like, we would love to minimize those for IBRL purposes. And so, I think it's actually great that a validator that has 5% of the stake is running on 1 box, because it means we know who that stake is, and they're not like all these white labeled white boxes. It makes it easier to see what's going on, to see who's doing what. and it reduces the number of signatures required to aggregate for the network, which is just a straight up bandwidth and latency cost.
Yeah, I would just say in response to what Michael said, I mean, I'm typically of the mindset that anything that makes things a little bit more difficult to run, you know, might discourage people from running more than one node. I mean, that's not proven or super effective, but I think, you know, if a validator was forced to split across multiple nodes, they might at least think twice, or at least if they were keeping the same name, then we could see that, you know, validator X was, you know, essentially aware of the limitation, aware for the reason of the limitation, but still trying to get around the limitation. And there could be a reputational motivation for them not to do that. At the same time, you know, with ETH, I think it's a lot easier to run a boatload of ETH validators on a single server than it is, you know, a boatload of Solana validators on the same server. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but yeah, I just think the orders of magnitude that we see people running ETH nodes, you know, on the same server will be very different than what we would see people doing on Solana. So I do think that ultimately it could encourage geographic decentralization. But then again, if slashing, I don't remember if the slashing proposal includes correlated slashing, but including correlated slashing could be one way to motivate a validator who does split up their stake to move it to different places.
Maybe it's worth also sharing a few things about what the marginal cost per validator is, because maybe people aren't aware of those. But each additional validator is one more signature to verify by the leader, and one more signature to verify by each of the replaying nodes. Okay, and one more packet that has to be sent to the leader, and two more packets that have to be sent over Turbine by the leader, and then those also get fanned out. So it's two more packets per validator. Then we also have in the Turbine tree calculation, which is actually a little bit inefficient right now, but we're doing a bunch of stake-weighted shuffles of the validator set. So each additional validator adds one more in that stake-weighted shuffle. And that's actually one of the more expensive things in the Turbine tree calculation right now, is this like repeated stake-weighted shuffle for each root. So those are the three areas that I see that are like, you know, a direct cost per validator. And so one additional validator who has one sol is not going to provide more decentralization to the network, which is worth that much bandwidth and latency cost. I don't know what the number is on where like another validator coming in at in terms of their percent of the stake, in terms of what marginal benefit we get is equal to the marginal cost. I just know that, you know, one sol is not the, I would rather have a one sol validator not on the network so that we can save on all of those things I just mentioned than have them participating, because, you know, one sol is not going to matter. They're never going to get a leader slot. They're never going to impact which fork it goes where, you know. So maybe that's some helpful context of like how I'm thinking about this.
Go ahead, Nye.
Yeah, so speaking, I guess, from an operator, okay, so be careful about how I like phrasing myself. So don't, obviously I'm not necessarily speaking for Block Demon, more speaking from personal experience. So please, nothing I say is Block Demon's official position, yada, yada, yada. But I do have a couple of observations as far as costs. Obviously, we just talked about the protocol costs involved in having Sybils. But there's also some flip side benefits to having not necessarily Sybils, but we have redundancy. And the question is redundancy and decentralization. The problem is we're conflating all those terms into a bunch of different types of decentralization. One of them is the most obvious ones, which is geo. There's network decentralization. There's governance decentralizations, which has nothing to do with that kind of decentralizations because it's more of a redundancy question. There's data center decentralization. And then also, I want to also address the notion of the complete non-decentralization that's happening in Ethereum, where we literally have, you know, many, many, many thousands of them just clustered together on single nodes. Now, that is a really bad example because it has nothing to do with Solana. Like you can't look at it that way because the marginal cost of adding a validator on Ethereum is basically zero. The marginal cost of physically adding a validator, even in the same data center, is significant for everyone, and it doesn't really matter who you are. Like it doesn't come for free. And so the notion that there's a huge incentive for Sybils is not necessarily I don't think an incentive is as big as people think they are. Now, I understand there are bad actors, but even in the best case, like let's say I like to think that Block Daemon's a good actor, we have incentives for quote unquote making civils just because we run validators for other folks. Now, because we're good actors, we try not to centralize those. We try not to have a bunch of stuff in the same place, in the same data center, on the same networks. Obviously, we have the same deployment structure. And this operationally, you know, if our operations teams fails, perhaps a bunch all go down at once. But experientially, that's not how our company is structured. Like, that's just not how we do business. So, then there's a question of incentives of, you know, moral hazard is what kind of behaviors are we incentivizing? We can't depend on, obviously, good behaviors. We can't depend on the fact that everybody's going to behave well. But I don't have a full understanding of, there's just so many different moving parts here that I don't understand necessarily where the threats are from the civils in the sense of it just costs me nothing to split my stake. I don't see where the incentives are, and I don't see they're aligned that well with the notion of the marginal cost of adding a physical validator, which is very expensive for Solana. Again, for Ethereum, it's obvious. Like, that's trivial. Everybody understands that. But for Solana, in my view, it's just very, very different. For Block Daemon anyways. So and then the other question is, generally, you know, is it wrong for somebody like Block Daemon to start running nodes for a lot of people, right? It could just be like 99% of the people that come to us to run nodes, it's just because they just don't have the expertise, the ability, the resources, the engineering capabilities, the 24/7 alert, that just a lot of stuff. It's all the same reasons everybody centralizes in the cloud, right? They just don't want to do it in-house. They don't want to do it on-prem, yada, yada, yada. And every now and then there's a question that comes up of like, well, would we do things on-prem for other people? And the answer is almost always no, for obvious reasons. I mean, it comes up and then we always shoot it down. So all those things always necessarily ends up this being that kind of centralization. Now, I'm not saying opinions. I'm just saying from the perspective of Block Daemon, that's the way things work for us on a day-to-day basis. And if people have questions about our incentives or that kind of stuff, you know, I don't want to take up all the time, but please come to me and talk to me personally about what it looks like for somebody like Block Daemon to run thousands, hundreds, tens of thousands of validators, because we have a different view from the individual validator.
Maybe it's worth to just steal Zan's point. I think what he's raising as a potential issue is that somebody might try and take up all the validator slots and raise the min stake artificially through that, so that very small validators who are outside of the top 2,000 no longer are participating, and that would raise, you know, whoever is doing the siblings percentage of the validator set, because now a bunch of the very small validators got frozen out and are in the inactive validator set. Is that your point, Zan?
My point is that it could be done intentionally, like you just said, and at least it should be considered, because we spent a lot of time worrying about the extreme cases where something could happen, so we want to prevent it. This is another example of that. You can't just dismiss it and say, well, we don't care about this one because it's not important. At least it should be considered. The other one is, you know, the not malicious, but simply, you know, part of someone's operating procedure is to create a whole bunch of nodes, maybe running them off of one piece of hardware because, I don't know, they like to do it that way, or maybe they're trying to trick people into believing they have redundancy they don't have. But at any rate, that 2,000 is not as obviously a 2,000 limit as it would seem to be, because if it's free to split, then that can get very quickly used up by one 10 million stake validator deciding to, you know, create 500, you know, 20K stake validators or something like that, because that's what's best for them. And that's just a concern I'd like to raise about that limit. That's all.
We're getting short on time. I want to make sure Yuri has a chance to bring a point. So go ahead, Yuri.
Thanks. First question, Max, when you say 80%, 18% of the state, more than 18% of the active stake cannot change, is that in stake weight or is that in validators, number of validator, etc.? Because if we keep all the big, like I'm trying to think about still a shuffling solution without a cap. And if you keep stake weight, so there, I need to look a bit on the data. But if you think that everybody who has more than 0.1% of the stake stays in the schedule, and you only shuffle the small ones, maybe it makes sense. So again, it's not a full solution, but like just to think about it. A second thing on the last point you and Zan talked about, I think it's less about malicious people trying to split their stake to, you know, to push people out. It's more that you know, the large ones, for every 500,000 SOL you put in on a different machine because you think it's better, it's the incentive of each actor by itself or some of them, and they just naturally push everybody up. It's not like a coordinated attack to push smaller validators out. It would just be the bigger one splitting to more and pushing people out. So that's just my thinking. But I think there's an agreement. Everybody wants to reduce like the vote costs, etc. Just trying to find a way to solve the 2,000 cap.
Yeah, I just would emphasize one more time, since we're running out of time, that the alternative, you can do three things. You can keep the current vote fees high, which is like basically saying there's a min stake to be profitable, which is quite high because you have to cover the 2 SOL a day cost. Or you can implement a min stake, okay? And the min stake has to be enough to do a similar thing to the votes, which means that the min stake that will result from that will be quite high because it has to be there to stop the DOS. And then finally, you can do what I'm suggesting here, which is cap the validator set. And the question we should be asking is, where does that min stake end up in all three of these proposals? My argument is that the vote fees one, it's quite high right now. I think in order to do a safe version of the min stake, it would be quite high. And I think the equilibrium, after we look at all the sibling games and stuff, will still end up being much lower in this world of what the min stake required to become an active validator is. And so that's why I would favor this approach. So the approach is not, can we have a min stake or not? We need to have a min stake somehow. It's enforced by something. And the question is, which approach makes that min stake the smallest?
All right. I think we're at time. We'll probably end it there. Thank you, Max, for joining and presenting. And thank you all for voting. If you have not voted yet, please vote. We've got probably about 5 hours left. But yeah, see you all in 2 weeks for the community call. Bye.